So with our speakers today informing our panel, we also have Dr. Ian Thompson, who's chairman of our GU committee, as you all know, and Rick Bangs, whom you also all know, is the chairman of our patient advocates committee and serves on GU with Dr. Thompson. I believe they've had a good working relationship and many successes, and I think they can talk about these to you. And of course, we welcome your questions. So guys, I'll start with the easy one. What's actually worked, Ian, in GU in terms of patient advocacy and improving your trials?
Well, it's been a remarkable experience, and we're extremely fortunate. And as I was listening to these conversations, and we talked for a little bit before we got together, a lot of it has to do with the advocates' skills and abilities that they bring to the committee. And so the GU committee, those of you who are GU committee members have experienced this. We have two remarkable advocates, Rick Bangs and Tony Crispino, who bring a commitment, and sometimes I'm convinced that they understand the disease process as well or better than the physicians and other members of the committee, as well as bringing their own personal perspectives and the perspectives of folks with the disease. They integrate very extensively with the advocacy community. So perhaps, Chuck, I may not be the right person to be up here because all I can do is tell you success stories, because we might be able to hear some of the challenges. But how they work is throughout the entire process. And one of the comments that was made earlier with regards to respecting and integrating them with the committee and the activities of protocol design is that we look on them as nothing different than the other members of the committee. We value their input from the very beginning to the final reporting of the trial. For example, identifying areas of unmet need within the organ sites. They participate in the study design, and I would just ask those of you who are developing or who have developed clinical trials, look at your face sheet. How many face sheets have an advocate as a co-investigator? That's the level of integration that I think we aspire to have across SWOG. They can tell us something about the burden of the trial itself, and as well as the acceptability. For example, when they look at a study calendar, we're looking at getting data, right? Biologics and data. They're looking at bus trips, the need to pay the parking fee as they go out of your cancer center's parking lot, as well as the burden of the treatments themselves. So they take a different perspective, and they'll ask questions like, why do you have this visit? Why do you have this test? Is it really appropriate or necessary? Chuck, I'm not a colorectal person, but if it involved a bowel prep before a visit, I think I would probably stand up and say I'm not terribly interested as a patient surrogate. They also help us with, for example, with recruitment and being advocates across the nation. You know, it really is a remarkably different experience to listen to someone talking about the equipoise of a clinical trial from the physician standpoint, as opposed to someone who may even be a participant in the clinical trial, that they can speak to the fact, I looked at this, and I looked at the standard of care versus the experimental arms, and I understood that the risks and benefits were such that I'm okay allowing the randomization to occur. More recently, we've had some interesting experiences, and I'm sure those of you in other committees have had this as well, where you launch a clinical trial, and then midway through the clinical trial, something shows up in New England Journal that may potentially change the scientific merit or the impact or the accessibility of the trial. And we look at it from a physician standpoint, and we look at the folks that are in the community that are approaching the patients and talking to the patients about this. But the nice thing about it, and we had this experience earlier this week at the GU committee, where we've had this experience, having someone who's there, who's in touch with the patient community, they can tell us, are we thinking with the patient's best interest in mind? And it's an irreplaceable it's an irreplaceable ability to have on the committee. They also help maintain, because sometimes as you begin a trial and launch a trial, you need to maintain the interest and in the community, and they really help us remarkably. And finally, they are always bringing back to us issues with regards to input from the from patients as with regards to the trial itself. So I'm really reiterating what has been said earlier, but the key issue, the two key things are, number one, from a leadership standpoint, you really need to have, just like you have to have good investigators and good science and good trials, having someone who is an exceptionally talented and qualified advocate is probably as important or more important than any other component of your committee. So you have to have the right person. I love the concept of providing the feedback as well. That's wonderful, Nancy. And the second thing is maintain that relationship with the advocate such that they fully understand. I mean, Rick is completely integrated. He is one of the most valued members of the GU committee, as is Tony. They need to be empowered to speak up, and they do, and you need to listen to them.
Thank you. Rick, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so
I think it's already on.
It's already on? Okay. All right, so I'm kind of two-hatted in this panel. So I'm both the chair of the Patient Advocate Committee and also the bladder cancer patient advocate. So there's a couple comments I wanted to start with. One is the good news for all of us is nothing you're hearing today or going to hear is patented. Okay? So normally we talk about don't try this at home. I'm encouraging all of you to try this at home in your committees. The second thing I want to say is that the GU committee does not have exclusive rights to patient advocate engagement. So we have some good models that are happening in this room. I want to acknowledge that as I'm commenting from the GU patient advocate perspective. So now let me reveal the secret sauce, the recipe for the secret sauce on the GU side. And it really starts with leadership at the committee and the subcommittee level, as well as the entire committee walking the talk. Okay? The theme of our meeting is exactly what's going on here. So what does that mean? The central premise here, and it's a core value for this committee, is that the patient advocates add value and that we should be embedded into the process as trusted partners. Okay? So I work in IT, and my job is to liaison between the business partners and the IT folks. My function is the human resources function. So if I've done my job, the people that I work with, my business partners, should see me as a trusted partner. And that's what's happening in GU. Second, Tony and I are warmly introduced with trumpets blaring, confetti falling from the ceiling, and occasionally fireworks at every single meeting. Those of you who have had the pleasure of joining a GU meeting will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who had not, I invite you to join us. Third, we are engaged in the process from inception. Okay? So the patient advocates hear me mention this often, so does survivorship. I talk about early and often, like voting in Chicago. This is the goal that we must achieve. All right, so we need to be continually asked for our feedback. We need to be asked at the point of concept, when we're defining concepts, when we're doing design, when we're doing development, and when we're doing delivery. The 10 key questions, which again are out on the registration table, reinforce this. This is an engagement model. Perhaps it can be improved, but this is the model that we have proposed for the last 3 or 4 years. Fourth, Tony and I never feel like we're optional or an auxiliary service. We are part of the committee. Fifth, Tony and I feel an accountability to the committee and to our respective diseases. The buck stops here. And probably finally, this committee is always seeking continuous improvement. Okay, so in short, we're embedded. We're engaged early and often. We're viewed as trusted partners, and the team recognizes and expects value from our contribution.
Thank you. My second and final question I can throw out to our two speakers. I was struck when you talked a little bit about the education of patient advocates and mentioned a lot of it comes from these meetings, but I can't imagine that's enough. What more can we do to help our advocates? Could we send you to courses? Should we sponsor special sessions within our meetings? Is there more we can do?
Yeah.
Surprise.
I think this is an ongoing issue for patient advocates, and there are multiple places where you can get training on scientific issues, including ASCO and AACR. But when you're really doing clinical trial development, that's stuff you don't learn anyplace else. I mean, I've read an awful lot about it, but you really have to be in the room with people when they're talking. So a couple things that I've found to be helpful is that you'd never have a newbie without a mentor in the room, and so that they can chat back and forth. And when I'm on phone calls with newbies, we text wildly. They're like, who is saying that? What are they saying? What is SWOG? You know, because those are the, yeah, those are the nitty-gritty things that get in the way, because that's not our lexicon. So that kind of mentoring can be enormously helpful. I also tend to assign people to scientific mentors so that they have somebody who they know will be supportive when they come up with a question. In terms of training, when you do your young investigator training, I would send a couple of advocates to that. I think that those are incredible places for people to learn, and actually ASCO does a young investigator training, and advocates are part of the program. And it takes time. I mean, if you went, what I hear is that in medical school you spend the first year learning the language. Well, that's what it takes for us too, and that means we don't go to school all the time, so it takes a little bit longer. Flashcards.
Okay. Dr. Katz, do you want to add anything?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think back to when I was an assistant professor, and I got assigned 2 mentors who were full professors, and they guided my way through the system, and I think that's exactly what Nancy was just speaking about. The other thing is that I am a behavioral scientist who does community-engaged research, and as I was listening to Nancy speak, I really think that the patient advocates and their role in the cooperative groups is like doing community-engaged research. And really, it's that full partnership where you both will have a win-win situation. The win will be that the trials will hopefully go through the system quicker, and the advocates will also win by knowing that they're out there doing something really important and bringing it back to the community.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Lawton?
Hi, I'm Wendy Lawton, and I have the good fortune of serving with Rick Bangs as the SWOG staff member on the Patient Advocate Committee. And I first wanted to ask all of our advocates in the audience to stand so folks know who you are.
Well done.
I'd like to recognize Michelle, who's also at the end of the aisle. This is a really, really terrific group of people, and I got to meet them for the first time in person at this meeting, and I think it's probably one of the best gifts of this session. My question was to Nancy and to Dr. Katz. What advice would you give a doctor, and what advice would you give an advocate if the relationship isn't working, if they don't feel that they're being heard, or that they don't feel that they're getting value?
I think the most important thing, and it always goes back to the same thing, even in your personal relationship, it's communication. So having an honest conversation and being willing to sort of go out on that limb and admit to each other that it's not working, and then finding ways to work together so that you can find a way that the advocate feels important, and it's also that the investigator is involving the advocate. So again, it's throughout my life, even when I'm working with students, it's about communication and having expectations and meeting those expectations.
Yeah, I would agree. Making sure expectations are set up front is really important. Chuck, you can do interventions, right? I mean, sometimes it just takes sitting people down in a room together and saying, you know, I don't like the way you're treating me, and how are we going to fix that? And those can be uncomfortable, but you can work through them. I mean, everybody's a grown-up, and we all want the same thing.
Rick, do you want to add anything?
No.
No. Ian?
Well, you know, I was just thinking, these remarkable advocates, and I think all the folks that work with organizations like this, when we increasingly involve them, I'd be personally interested in, you know, you're doing it oftentimes on your own dime, as we talked about earlier. You're spending a lot of work on this and time on this. It's uncompensated. Certainly there's a passion behind it, but I'm always wondering, and Rick, chime in, what can we do other than saying thank you to not to compensate, I'm losing, but you know what I'm saying. How can we make this perhaps a more sought after career aspiration? What can we do?
You know, I have to say, Rick sent me all the patient advocate materials for SWOG, and I know there's always a difference between what it says on paper and what happens, but I think SWOG, the fact that you guys send people to ASCO, is that right? I mean, that's huge, because most of us don't have institutional support, and so being able to go to a meeting like that and interact with other advocates is a very big deal. One group I was with did an advocate award, or opened up awards to advocates. And I think, and actually one thing that means a lot to people is the cover sheet thing. You know, being involved with the development of the research writing is intensely interesting.
Yeah, so I've always said that I get more back than I give. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. And I think the advocates believe that as well. I mean, we are here because we want to change the standard of care. And so it is such an honor to be here that in and of itself, just being here to me makes it all worthwhile. Let me go back to the question that was asked about a circumstance that isn't working. So I think at the root cause, and I'm going to make a plug for some work that we're doing right now. I think it's unclear to sometimes to the patient advocates and as well to the researchers how this engagement model works, what questions we should be asking, and how we should be interacting. All right, and so this project that we're working on right now around stakeholder engagement, I think is critical to getting at the root cause of these situations. This is the practical way for us to prevent this very circumstance. All right, and so the 10 key questions, that's been on the table for 3 or 4 years. That's a starting point for this discussion. The work that we're doing on stakeholder engagement around the capsule development or the triage process, that'll be another input into that process. But if we can agree on an engagement model, and I don't think we agree today, either within the advocate side or within the researcher side, and I mean individually within those groups. If we can agree on that, I think we can eliminate a huge portion of these conflicts, and I think from a value point of view, we'll see significant value in terms of what we're contributing, which should be about shorter time to delivery of clinical trial results.
Okay, well, that was great stuff and exactly what I wanted, so I need to thank our speakers and our panel members. I want to let everybody here know we're going to move the ideas presented forward, discuss it at committee chairs, et cetera, in the future, so please stay tuned.